Welcome back. The breaking story at this time is that the President, Muhammadu Buhari, will not be presenting the 2017 budget to a joint session of the National Assembly today at noon, as earlier announced. Another date will be announced to Nigerians. No reason has been given for the change, but the budget, the 2017 budget, is proposed at 7.28 trillion naira with an oil benchmark of $42.50 per barrel, an exchange rate of between 290 and 305 naira per dollar, and it's about 19.95%, more than the 6.07 trillion naira budget presented in 2016. So I'm being joined now on the program by Johnson Chukwu, who's the CEO of Kari Asset Management, as we continue the conversation around the 2017 budget. Good morning to you, and thank you so much for coming on the program.
My pleasure.
So 7.28 trillion naira benchmark, oil benchmark of $42.50, an exchange rate of between 290 naira and 305 to the dollar. A lot has been said about the parameters as contained in that 2017 budget proposal. What do you make of it?
Well, I think, like rightly pointed out, that we have seen an increment in naira value of the budget. But in dollar terms, that budget is actually smaller than the 6.0607 budget of 2016. But that notwithstanding, the areas I've looked at is how does the government want to fund this? The government has projected a federal collective revenue about 10 trillion. 5 trillion of that is supposed to come from oil revenue. And we still have the challenges of the Niger Delta. If you look at our budget projections, we are looking at 2.2 million barrels per day. And we've not done 2.2 million barrels for the last 5 years. So to me, it's very optimistic to believe that we can achieve a 2.2 million barrels per day production.
But then, listening to listening to Dolapo a few minutes ago, he was actually optimistic, especially as he sees that Forcados is coming back on stream, and we've got Akwa Ibom as well coming back on stream, even though, as of now, there's no very clear picture with regards what the federal government's dialogue is with the Niger Delta militants, and if we're going to see less of vandalism of pipelines in that region.
Well, if Forcados comes back on stream, Forcados will be coming back on stream twice in the last 9 months because it's been breached on 2 occasions. So there's nothing on the ground today that will convince anybody that that pipeline will not be breached in the immediate future. If you look at the production of about 1.6 million barrels we are producing currently, a large portion of that production is actually coming from deep offshore. If you look at the fiscal regime that governs the sharing of oil revenue, you realize that the government gets very minimal income from deep offshore production. So the place where we get actually our income, our large share of that oil revenue is from onshore production and shallow offshore production. And unfortunately, the onshore production and the shallow offshore production are the ones that are suffering the greatest threat from the militants. And if you ask me, I think the government has not really gotten it right with how to manage the issue of militants in the Niger Delta. I'll come back to that.
So you started talking about the funding plans of the 2017 appropriation, and the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Budget and Planning have alluded to the fact that it will be funded primarily with recovered loot and, of course, other bonds, auctions and the rest of it. What do you make of it?
Well, the recovered loot, I don't know how much they have in recovered loot. I've looked at some of the projections, some of the revenue projections. If you talk about the specific projections that have been indicated in the medium-term expenditure framework that was represented by the Minister of National Planning, there's a provision of 1.6 trillion from stamp duties, 1.88 trillion from VAT collections. And like I mentioned, there's a provision of 5 trillion to come from oil revenue. The other portions you are referring to, they say they're going to do licensing of oil wells. They're going to review the marginal fields and obviously license new marginal fields. They're going to review the effectiveness of the revenue collection agencies. And they're going to review the 80% requirement that revenue agencies should only limit 80% of their revenue to the federation account. Probably you will achieve some level of efficiencies from those reviews. But I do not know if they will be sufficient to achieve the projected expenditure of 7.298 trillion. If you look at the budget again and you want to decompose the budget to capital expenditure and recurrent expenditure. There's a capital expenditure projection of 2.24 trillion this in 2017 based on the medium-term expenditure framework. But there's also a budget, a borrowing plan, a budget deficit of 2.356 trillion. So in effect, the entire capital expenditure budget is premised on the fact that the government is going to borrow the entire capital expenditure budget. So all total revenue of the government will be spent on debt service obligations and recurrent expenditure. There is no portion of our total revenue that is going to be committed to capital expenditure if we do not borrow. And for me, those are not very comfortable figures.
And how would that affect growth, particularly as we have the economy in a recession? And everybody, most Nigerians, most market analysts have been of the view that by 2017 we should begin to see a little bit of an easing in the recession. We've had 3 quarters of contraction, and everybody is feeling the pinch.
Well, when I looked at the borrowing plan, I actually got worried. There's a borrowing plan of 1.26 trillion from local market, local borrowing, and another 1.06 trillion of foreign borrowing. The 1.26 trillion local currency borrowing will mean that government will borrow on the average $100 billion naira from the local market. So there's a threat from the indication, for me, the interpretation of that is that they're going to see a tight local currency money market environment throughout 2017 because government will continue to crowd out the private sector from the debt market. And that does not augur well for an economy that's in a recession. If the government crowds out the private sector, the private sector find it difficult to access credit and will not be able to continue or get into gainful real sector productive activities. So if we are going to be borrowing 100 billion from the budget estimation, and that assumes that the other revenue projection we achieved, if they're not achieved, the government will be compelled to borrow more if we must achieve the target expenditure in the budget.
Do you think that this new budget will stimulate new investments?
Well, if they achieve a 2.24 trillion capital expenditure,